At 2:17 a.m., a plane vanished over the Atlantic. 3,000 years ago, a train appeared in the desert. Both returned. The desert is never truly silent. When wind moves across endless dunes, it creates a low whisper. A sound so faint and constant, it feels like something breathing beneath the sand. Dr. Arif Hussain did not believe in superstition. He was an archaeologist. 15 years of fieldwork had hardened him against myths, legends, and the dramatic imaginations of local villagers. Every ruin had a logical origin. Every artifact had a timeline. But the object standing before him shattered logic. Half buried in golden desert sand stood a train. Not debris, not fragments, a full train, intact. The metal exterior was rusted but structurally solid. The windows were unbroken. The wheels rested directly on sand. There were no rails, not broken ones, not buried ones. None. His assistant, Mejabin, stood beside him, and her face pale beneath the dying orange sunlight. "Sir, this isn't possible." Arif didn't respond immediately. He walked closer, brushing sand from the lower panel. Strange symbols were carved into the steel. Not painted, not etched recently. Carved deep, worn by centuries. They did not resemble Egyptian hieroglyphs, not Mesopotamian, not Indus Valley. Nothing recorded in known civilization. And yet carbon dating results from surface oxidation samples had already returned. Approximately 3,000 years old. Railway systems were invented barely 200 years ago. Arif swallowed. How does a train exist before the invention of railways? The desert wind shifted direction. For a brief second, Arif felt something else. The sensation of being watched. He looked toward the windows. Darkness inside. But the darkness felt occupied. Entering the train. The main door stood slightly ajar. Not broken. Not forced, just open enough, as if inviting. Arif turned on his flashlight and stepped forward. The air inside was stale, but not decayed. There was no overwhelming scent of rot. That was the first unnatural detail. The beam of light slid across rows of seats. Then it stopped. Mejabin gasped behind him. Every seat was occupied. Skeletons. Perfectly positioned skeletons. Not collapsed. Not scattered, sitting upright, hands resting neatly on their laps, heads slightly tilted toward the windows, all of them staring outside, as if watching something or waiting for something. Arif's throat tightened. There were no signs of struggle, no torn clothing, no luggage, only bone, clean, dry, preserved by time or something else entirely. Mejabin whispered, "Are they passengers?" Arif moved closer to one of the skeletons. Its fingers were curled around something metallic. He gently pried it loose. A ticket, solid metal, cold, etched with the same unknown symbols carved outside the train. At the bottom of the ticket was a single number. 0A. Strange pressure filled the air. It felt heavier, thicker. Like oxygen was being slowly drained from the carriage. "We should leave," Mejabin said quietly. That was when they heard it. A sound from deep within the train. Metal tightening. A slow mechanical tension. Clank, clank, clank. Arif froze. The wheels were still outside. There were no rails. The sun had fully disappeared beyond the dunes. The interior grew darker. And then a shrill, ancient whistle tore through the air. The sound was violent, long, agonizing. It didn't sound like a machine. It sounded like something screaming through metal. The interior lights flickered, then turned on. Dim yellow bulbs overhead began glowing one by one down the carriage. Arif stared upward. There was no visible wiring, no generator, no power source. And yet the lights hummed softly. Then, a sound beside him, a faint click. He looked down. One skeleton's finger had moved, just slightly. Mejabin stumbled backward. "Sir," a dry cracking noise echoed through the carriage. Another skeleton's neck shifted, then another, then all of them, slowly, deliberately. The skeletons began turning their heads, not toward the windows anymore, toward the aisle, toward Arif and Mehjabin. Empty eye sockets now faced them directly. The pressure in the air intensified, so the train vibrated. But the wheels outside remained motionless. And yet, the carriage lurched forward. Sand outside shifted, as if something invisible had formed beneath the train. Invisible rails. The whistle sounded again, this time deeper, more resonant. The skeletons stood up in perfect unison. The sound of bone grinding against bone filled the space. They did not stagger, they did not wobble. They rose smoothly, like obedient passengers answering a call. The door behind Arif slammed shut, locked. No visible mechanism, no handle responding. Mehjabin's voice shook. "They're looking at us." The skeletons took one synchronized step forward. The lights flickered. Symbols carved along the ceiling began to glow faintly. A dim, pale blue radiance spread across the carvings. Arif felt a vibration inside his skull. Not sound, not external, inside. A whisper without voice. Journey initiated. The desert outside was motionless. No tracks formed, no sand displaced visibly. Yet the train was moving, faster. The windows no longer showed dunes. They showed darkness. Not night, not sky, an endless void. The skeleton closest to Arif extended its arm. Its jaw slowly opened. No vocal cords, no lungs. Yet a sound emerged. A dry, hollow breath. Waiting. Arif understood something in that moment. These were not merely remains. They were not victims. They were not random dead. They were passengers. And this train was still operating. It had stopped for 3,000 years, waiting for new tickets. The metal ticket in Arif's hand began to grow warm. The number 0 slowly shifted, becoming 1. The whistle screamed again, and the train accelerated into darkness. The first thing Arif noticed was the silence. Not the silence of the desert, not even the silence of an empty room. This was a different kind. A silence so thick it felt like the world had been muted, as if sound itself was being swallowed before it could exist. The windows no longer showed dunes. They showed nothing. A black void pressed against the glass like deep water. No stars, no moon, no horizon, just endless dark. Mehjabin clutched Arif's sleeve, her nails digging into his arm. "Sir, we're not moving through the desert." Arif tried the door again. It wouldn't budge. The handle was cold, stubborn, final. He turned and backed away, breathing carefully, forcing his brain to work like it always did. Analyze, interpret, solve. The skeletons stood in the aisle like a frozen audience. Their skulls were angled toward Arif and Mehjabin, and empty eye sockets fixed on them with a focus that felt impossible for the dead. Above, the ceiling symbols pulsed in faint blue light. The glow moved like a slow heartbeat. Arif looked down at the metal ticket still in his hand. The number had changed. 1. He hadn't imagined it. Mehjabin whispered, "That means, you're the first?" Arif didn't answer because the air had shifted again. It felt warmer, like a breath exhaled from the walls. Then the train spoke, not through speakers, not through any mechanical system. The voice arrived inside their skulls like a memory that didn't belong to them. "Welcome, passengers," Mehjabin cried out and covered her ears, even though the sound wasn't in the air. Arif felt the message pulsing behind his eyes. "You have boarded the vessel of return. Next stop, the station where time is paid." The skeletons did not move, but somehow their stillness felt like obedience. Arif forced himself to walk forward, into the carriage, away from the locked door. Mehjabin followed, trembling, her flashlight shaking, beams jumping across the walls. The train interior stretched longer than it should. Arif realized it slowly, like a nightmare detail you don't notice until it's too late. From outside, the train had looked like 4 carriages. Inside, the corridor continued far beyond that. Every few steps, the lights flickered, and the walls seemed to breathe. Not physically, but in the way shadow shifts when something alive is behind it. They passed more seats, more skeletons, hundreds, thousands. Each one positioned the same way, and as if arranged by a careful hand. Their bones were clean, but some still wore remnants of old clothing, not modern fabric. Ancient linen, leather straps, beads, armor pieces corroded into green, as if passengers from different centuries had boarded at different times. Mejabin's voice cracked. They're from different eras. Arif's mind raced. A train older than railways. Passengers from civilizations spanning thousands of years. A void outside the windows. A voice speaking without speakers. One explanation clawed at the edges of his rationality. This wasn't a train. It was a container. A moving thing that collected people. A vessel that traveled through something that wasn't space. Something that wasn't time. Then they reached the dining car. It smelled like dust and cold metal. Tables were set with silverware that had never rusted. Plates that were perfectly clean. Cups that held no water. But the seats were occupied. Not by skeletons, by people. Arif stopped so suddenly, Mejabin nearly slammed into him. 3 figures sat at the nearest table. Their skin was gray, stretched too tightly over their bones. Eyes open but unfocused. They looked like living statues. One wore a soldier's uniform from an era Arif recognized, early 20th century. Another wore something older, like a robe stitched with ancient symbols. The third was in modern clothing, a hoodie, sneakers, a wristwatch, a boy, no older than 20. His eyes flicked toward Arif, and in that instant, Arif knew the boy was conscious. The boy's mouth opened. No sound came out at first. Then, very faintly, as if his voice had to fight through layers of distance, "Don't talk to it." Arif stepped closer. "Who are you?" The boy's eyes darted toward the ceiling, toward the pulsing symbols. "It listens," he whispered. "If you say the wrong thing, it writes you into the schedule." Mejabin shook her head violently, refusing to process any of it. "What is it?" The boy swallowed. His throat moved with effort, like he hadn't used it in years. "The conductor." Arif scanned the dining car. There was no conductor, no footsteps, no sound. But then a shadow fell across their table. Not from a light source, from above. From something that wasn't visible until it wanted to be. The air pressure dropped so fast Arif's ears popped, and a shape formed at the far end of the car. Tall, thin, dressed in a conductor's uniform that looked stitched from darkness itself. Its face was mostly hidden by a cap, but beneath the brim, Arif saw a suggestion of a mouth. Too long, too wide, and eyes that weren't eyes. They were empty holes filled with moving night. The boy immediately lowered his head, body stiff with terror. Mejabin whimpered. Arif could not move. The thing glided forward without walking, its feet never touching the floor. When it spoke, it didn't move its mouth. The words appeared in their minds. "Ticket." Arif's hand, without his permission, lifted the metal ticket forward. The conductor leaned close. A cold smell washed over them, like wet stone in a tomb. It studied the number on the ticket. 1. The conductor's head tilted. First of this era, it whispered into Arif's skull. A rare payment. Arif forced his lips to move. "Where are you taking us?" The lights flickered. The conductor's shadow expanded across the walls. "To the station that owns your years." Mejabin's voice broke, almost a plea. "Let us off, please." The conductor turned toward her. The void in its eyes seemed to widen. "Off? There is no off. There is only arrival. The boy looked up for a second and mouthed silently, "Don't bargain." But Mejabin was already sobbing. "We didn't do anything. We just found..." The conductor raised one gloved finger. The entire train shuddered. All skeletons in the distance turned their heads at once toward the dining car. 1,000 empty skulls pointing like a compass needle. Mejabin's words died in her throat. Her mouth remained open, but no sound came. Arif watched in horror as her voice left her, not metaphorically. Something like thin gray smoke seeped from her lips, twisting upward, drawn toward the ceiling symbols. Mejabin clutched her throat, eyes bulging. The boy whispered, "It took her sound. Now she can't scream when it comes closer." Arif's stomach dropped. He looked at the conductor. "What do you want?" The train slowed. The darkness outside the windows rippled, as if something massive moved beneath it. The conductor leaned close to Arif, so close Arif felt cold against his skin without contact. "Time. You found me after 3,000 years. That discovery is a debt." Arif's mind flashed back to the skeletons. The tickets, the number. "Payment," he whispered. "The tickets are payment." The conductor straightened. "Yes." Arif's heart pounded. "So, if we pay, we can leave?" A low laugh filled his skull. Not sound, but sensation, like ice cracking. "Payment does not buy freedom. Payment buys purpose." Arif didn't understand. Then the train whistle blew again, but this time it didn't sound like metal. It sounded like a crowd screaming through a narrow tunnel. The dining car lights went out for a second. When they came back, the windows were different. No longer void. Now they showed a landscape that made Arif's blood run cold. A station, ancient, impossible, built from stone that glowed faintly blue like the ceiling symbols, columns carved with the same unknown script. And the platform was filled with people, not living people, figures standing motionless. Some were skeletons still wearing scraps of flesh. Some were fully human, eyes blank, faces drained of expression. They all faced the incoming train, waiting. The boy whispered, voice trembling, "That's the station. That's where it takes what's left of you." Mejabin, unable to speak, clawed at Arif's arm, the tears streaming silently down her face. The conductor's presence tightened. "Arrival in," it announced inside their minds. The ceiling symbols brightened. Arif looked down at his ticket. The number 1 began to melt, dripping like heated metal. The digit reformed into something else, a new symbol, not a number, a mark like a hook. And as it formed, Arif suddenly felt a memory surge into his mind that wasn't his. A memory of standing on that same platform, holding the same ticket, thousands of years ago. He saw a different face in his own reflection on the glass. Older, terrified, familiar. And he realized the worst truth. The train hadn't been waiting for new passengers. It had been waiting for him to discover it again, for the loop to close. The train began to slow into the station, and every passenger on the platform lifted their heads at the same time, as if they recognized him, as if they'd been waiting 3,000 years for their first passenger to come home. Flight 307 departed from John F. Kennedy International Airport, New York, bound for Istanbul, Turkey. It was a routine transatlantic flight. Clear skies stretched across the eastern seaboard. No storms over the Atlantic. No unusual solar activity. The aircraft, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, had passed all maintenance checks. Captain Daniel Reeves, a 22-year veteran pilot with an impeccable record, was in command. First Officer Melissa Grant handled co-pilot duties. On board were 189 passengers and crew, families, business travelers, a college soccer team flying overseas, a retired couple celebrating their anniversary. Nothing unusual. At 2:16 a.m. Eastern Time, The aircraft cruised at 36,000 feet over the North Atlantic. At 2:17 a.m., Flight 307 vanished from radar. Not gradually, not with signal interference. It was there 1 second, gone the next. Air traffic control in Boston called repeatedly. Flight 307, Boston Center, radio check. Silence. No distress call, no transponder signal, no emergency beacon, nothing. Search and rescue operations began within hours. The U.S. Coast Guard deployed aircraft. Naval vessels scanned the Atlantic. Satellite imagery was reviewed. No debris field, no oil slick, no floating luggage. It was as if the aircraft had been erased. For 48 hours, media across the United States exploded with speculation. Mechanical failure, terrorism, hijacking, catastrophic decompression, government cover-ups. Families gathered at JFK, crying beneath bright fluorescent lights. Then, at exactly 2:17 a.m. 2 days later, radar picked it up again. Same coordinates, same altitude, same heading. The Flight 307 had reappeared precisely where it had disappeared. Controllers froze. The plane's transponder code was unchanged. Ground speed, 488 knots. Altitude, 36,000 feet. As if no time had passed. Flight 307, this is Boston Center. Do you read? No response. The aircraft continued flying its programmed route toward Europe. Fighter jets were scrambled from a U.S. Air Force base in Massachusetts. 2 F-15 approached the aircraft cautiously. The pilots later testified that nothing appeared externally wrong. No visible damage, no smoke. Navigation lights blinking normally. But something felt off. There was no movement inside, one fighter pilot reported. No head movement, no gestures. Oh, it was like looking at mannequins. The Dreamliner eventually entered Turkish airspace and was granted emergency landing clearance at Istanbul Airport. The landing was smooth, perfect. The autopilot disengaged only seconds before touchdown. The aircraft rolled to a stop on the runway. Airport emergency vehicles surrounded it. Ground crews approached carefully. There was no response from the cockpit. No radio communication. The cabin windows revealed passengers sitting upright. Still. Too still. Airport security forced the cockpit door open first. Captain Daniel Reeves sat in his seat. Seatbelt fastened. Hands resting calmly on the controls. Eyes open. Dead. No trauma. No blood. No visible injury. His skin pale but intact. First Officer Melissa Grant sat beside him in identical condition. Medical teams moved into the cabin. Row after row of passengers remained seated upright. Seatbelts fastened. Tray tables up. Eyes open. All facing the windows. Every single one of the 189 souls on board was dead. There were no signs of struggle, no oxygen masks deployed, no cabin damage, no burn marks, no decompression signs. Autopsies later revealed something even stranger. No toxins, no pathogens, no heart attacks, no oxygen deprivation. It was as if their bodies had simply stopped simultaneously. In Captain Reeves's right hand, investigators found a crumpled sheet torn from the cockpit flight log. On it, written in shaky handwriting, they were waiting in the sky. Nothing else. The black box was removed and transported to the United States for analysis. And that's when things became impossible. The cockpit voice recorder from Flight 307 contained 2 hours of normal flight communication, weather updates, altitude adjustments, routine checklists. Then, at 2:16:43 a.m., First Officer Grant's voice changed. "Captain, do you see that light ahead?" Captain Reeves responded calmly. "Negative." "What light?" There was a pause. Then Grant again, quieter this time. "It's not on radar." The audio picked up faint static. Reeves leaned forward. "I have visual now. That's not another aircraft." The radar logs confirmed. Nothing was ahead of them. But the cockpit recorder captured something else. A sound, very faint, like distant wind or whispering. At 2:16:59 a.m., Grant spoke again. "It's above us." Reeves: "Impossible. We're at cruise altitude." Then a new voice appeared on the recording, high-pitched, childlike, whispering, "Don't climb." Silence in the cockpit. Grant's breathing accelerated. "Did you hear that?" Reeves didn't answer. Instead, he said something that sent chills through every investigator who later reviewed the tape. "There's something outside the window." The cockpit camera, which normally records for safety review, had glitched at 2:16:58. Only one frame survived before blackout. That frame showed something pressed against the windshield. Not a bird, not debris. A shape, large, smooth, featureless except for what appeared to be dozens of circular indentations, like eyes. The recording resumed for exactly 8 more seconds. The whispering grew louder. Not one voice, hundreds, layered, overlapping. At 2:17:03, Captain Reeves shouted, "It's surrounding us!" The final clear words from the cockpit. "They're not clouds." Then screaming. Not from Reeves, not from Grant, but from outside. A low-frequency roar that overloaded the microphone. The recording cut off at 2:17:09 a.m., exactly when radar contact was lost. Investigators believed the aircraft had encountered some unknown atmospheric phenomenon, but satellite data from that moment showed no storm activity, no solar flare, no electromagnetic pulse, nothing. Except for one anomaly. For a fraction of a second at 2:17 a.m., several satellites recorded a distortion in the sky above the Atlantic, like a ripple in space itself, as if something enormous had moved. When the plane reappeared 48 hours later, plus the black box contained an additional 17 seconds of audio that had not been there before. 17 seconds recorded during the missing time. In those 17 seconds, there was no cockpit conversation, only a sound like breathing, slow, massive, and a final whisper, "Boarding continues." When Turkish investigators examined the cabin more closely, they noticed something else. Every passenger's fingernails were cracked, as if they had tried to grip something, not their seats, not each other, but the windows. Microscopic scratches covered the interior glass. All 189 passengers had clawed at the windows, as if something outside had been looking in, or trying to get in, or worse, trying to get out. Back in the United States, the recovered cockpit note underwent forensic testing. Handwriting matched Captain Reeves. But the ink analysis revealed something impossible. The ink had aged. Not 48 hours, not days. It showed chemical degradation consistent with years, as if the note had been written long ago. And that's when another detail surfaced. Air traffic logs showed that exactly 1 minute before Flight 307 reappeared, a private charter jet flying from Chicago reported something unusual. The pilot radioed, "There's a shadow above us. No wings, no heat signature." When asked for clarification, the pilot responded, "It's pacing us." Then his transmission cut into static. His aircraft landed safely. But every passenger on that plane later reported the same experience during the missing minute. They felt pressure, like deep underwater, and they heard whispering. One passenger wrote in a later statement, "It sounded like they were counting." The NTSB officially classified Flight 307 as an unexplained anomaly. Case closed. But 2 months later, a commercial flight from Los Angeles reported a brief radar blackout at exactly 2:17 a.m. for 3 seconds. During those 3 seconds, a flight attendant claimed she saw something outside the cabin window at 35,000 feet. Something moving alongside the aircraft. No wings, no engines, just a shape. And behind it, rows and rows of silent faces, pressed against nothing, waiting in the sky.